There is a moment, if you are ever lucky enough to spend time near an Amish farmstead after a long dry spell, when you notice something that most visitors walk right past. While the surrounding fields show the particular pale exhaustion of a summer without enough rain, the kitchen garden behind the house looks different. Darker, more alive, the rows of beans and squash and late-season tomatoes hold a color that does not belong to a landscape that has not seen serious rainfall in 3 weeks. And if you follow the irrigation lines back toward the house, simple gravity-fed channels carved into the earth with the same tools that dug the garden itself, you find it. A low mound of earth, perhaps 15 feet wide and 3 feet high, sometimes tucked against the north wall of the barn, sometimes built into a gentle slope at the edge of the property. There is no pump visible, no power line running to it, just a wooden hatch set into the ground, sealed with something that smells faintly of pine tar, and a worn groove in the soil where generations of feet have walked to and from it in the dry months of the year. What you are looking at is a system that predates municipal water infrastructure by roughly 200 years. A system that, in a growing number of municipalities across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana, has become technically illegal to install without a licensed contractor, and a permit that most county offices do not know how to issue, and a system that, in the communities where it has been in continuous use since the early 1700s, has never stopped working. The Amish call it simply what it is, a storage cistern. But the method behind it, the way it is sited, dug, lined, cured, sealed, and managed, is something that was refined over centuries. It was refined over centuries of careful seasonal observation, not as a curiosity from another century, but as a working answer to a problem that is becoming more pressing every decade. Water scarcity is not a problem the future is threatening to deliver. In significant portions of the American Midwest and Mid-Atlantic, it is already arriving. In significant portions of the American Midwest and Mid-Atlantic, it is already arriving. In the form of unpredictable seasonal dry spells that municipal systems were not designed to accommodate. The infrastructure built in the 20th century assumed a certain regularity of rainfall. That assumption is no longer reliable in the way it once was, and so what the Amish have been doing quietly begins to look less like a preserved relic and more like a working model. When German-speaking Anabaptist settlers began arriving in Pennsylvania in the early 18th century, water was not an abstraction to be managed by infrastructure. It was a seasonal reality to be understood and worked with directly, on its own terms and on its own schedule. The earliest Lancaster County settlements, many of them recorded in township surveys dating from 1729, were placed with careful attention to natural drainage lines, the orientation of roof lines relative to the prevailing direction of rainfall. The settlers were not guessing. They were applying a body of practical knowledge. Knowledge developed over generations in the Rhine Valley and in the Bernese Oberland, where the relationship between a farmstead and its water supply was a matter of survival. But springs run inconsistently, especially through August and September, and the Pennsylvania and Ohio summers could be dry in ways that no spring could entirely compensate for. And so the settlers brought with them a practice already centuries old in the villages of Central Europe, the underground cistern, dug below the frost line, lined with fired clay or hydraulic lime mortar, fed by rooftop runoff, and managed with patient seasonal attention. Lined with fired clay or hydraulic lime mortar, managed with patient seasonal attention. The fundamental principle is almost insultingly simple. Rainwater falls. You catch it before it reaches the ground. You move it underground where the temperature is stable. You draw from it slowly, steadily, when the surface has nothing to offer. 3 sentences, 300 years of continuous practice. 3 sentences, 300 years of continuous practice. Most modern treatments of rainwater harvesting begin and end with the plastic barrel. You have probably seen them, 55-gallon containers positioned under a downspout. They are not useless, but they are not the same thing. A plastic barrel in the sun gives you a few weeks of usable water before biological growth becomes a problem. It cannot store meaningfully through a serious dry spell. It offers no temperature stability, and 55 gallons in a dry month is a gesture rather than a supply. What the Amish method produces is something categorically different. Several thousand gallons of cool, stable, biologically quiet water. Water that can remain viable through a full dry season, 12 to 16 weeks, without chemical treatment, without electricity, without mechanical maintenance. The cistern itself begins with depth. Amish underground cisterns are almost never shallower than 6 feet, and in Holmes County, Ohio, 8 to 10 feet is the standard. This depth matters for reasons that go well beyond simple volume. Below 6 feet, soil temperature stabilizes at something between 50 and 57 degrees. The ground acts as a thermal battery that absorbs the heat of summer and releases it in winter, but levels out to a mean that barely fluctuates month to month. The ground acts as a thermal battery, levels out to a mean that barely fluctuates month to month. At that temperature, biological processes are dramatically slowed. There is no sunlight to trigger algae growth, no summer heat spike to accelerate bacterial reproduction. The water sits in a natural cold storage, and it can stay there for months without becoming what most people imagine standing water becomes. The lining of the cistern is where the craft knowledge becomes most specific. The traditional method uses a hydraulic lime mortar, not standard Portland cement. Portland cement is too rigid for the subtle but continuous seasonal movement of the surrounding soil. It develops hairline cracks within a few years. Hydraulic lime behaves differently. It remains slightly flexible after curing. It breathes just enough to accommodate the ground's movement without fracturing. It is a material that has found a kind of working agreement with the forces that will act on it, rather than simply resisting them until something gives. Knowledge that has been adjusted and tested across generations, passed down not as a formula, but as a practiced judgment. The particular lime preparation bears a close resemblance to the hydraulic techniques documented in Roman engineering, the opus signum method. The Amish arrived at their formulation through the same logic that produces convergent evolution in biology. When a material has been tested through 300 years of seasonal stress, it has usually found something close to the optimal form for its conditions. The rooftop catchment system is the entry point, and it is worth pausing for the objection. What about contamination? What about bird droppings and roof debris? The Amish address it with a mechanism so straightforward, it requires almost no explanation. The first flush diverter. It captures and discards the first gallons of any rainfall event before allowing the cleaner water that follows to enter the storage system. Those first gallons carry the dust, pollen, and organic debris. The water that follows, once the roof itself has been rinsed, is dramatically cleaner. Not perfectly clean by municipal standards, but clean enough for agricultural and household uses in communities using it for generations. This is the same principle applied in professional catchment design on every continent. Australian guidelines cite the same diversion principle. Indian programs use it. The engineering documentation agrees with the community practice because the community practice was working from reality. A rule of thumb holds that you want to divert roughly 1 gallon of first flush water for every 100 square feet of catchment roof area. That ratio has not been derived from a published source. It has been derived from watching, season after season, what volume produces the quality required. The siting of the cistern is the decision that rarely appears in any modern guide because it requires a kind of integrated environmental reading. Amish builders assess several factors simultaneously: natural drainage slope, prevailing wind direction, and accessibility for annual maintenance. Eli Yoder is a carpenter and farmer whose family has worked land in Wayne County for 4 generations. His great-grandfather built the original cistern. His grandfather repaired it in the 1950s. His father extended it in the 1970s. Eli manages both now. He speaks with matter-of-fact precision. Each spring, before the serious rains of April arrive, he descends into it himself. The wooden ladder is checked first, each rung pressed with full weight. At the bottom, he works around the perimeter with his hands, feeling for any softness. The texture he is looking for is something like a good eggshell. Firm, slightly grainy, continuous, any area that sounds hollow when he taps it with 2 knuckles is marked with a piece of chalk. The marks are repaired. He has been doing this since he was 9 years old. That is how the knowledge transferred, through a child's hands on lime-plastered walls in the dark. The interior is cleaned annually. In some households, the walls are brushed with a diluted solution of white vinegar and water, gently disrupting any biological film. In others, the walls receive a thin annual lime wash, a fresh coat of the same hydraulic lime used in the original construction, applied with a wide brush. This seals any invisible porosity and mildly alkalinizes the interior environment in a way that is naturally hostile to bacterial growth. The treatment is architectural, not chemical. The cistern itself is the water quality management system, and its maintenance is the process. This insight is what most modern guides have not caught up with. They assume chemical treatment is the solution. Add bleach, add iodine, add a UV filter. Add bleach, add iodine. add a UV filter. This is the insight that most modern guides have not caught up with. But they require supply chains and ongoing cost. The lime wash requires nothing that cannot be sourced locally, costs almost nothing, and has been effective for centuries. The overflow design deserves attention because it addresses a failure mode. What happens when the cistern is full and it keeps raining? An improperly designed overflow will either force water back up or allow the surrounding soil to become saturated, compromising structural integrity. The traditional Amish overflow directs excess water onto a stable surface, far enough from the structure that it cannot contribute to soil saturation near the walls. The underlying logic of this system is not beyond your reach. The scale can be reduced significantly without losing the essential principles. The principles require attention to depth, lining, inlet design, and annual maintenance. Those four things, applied consistently, are what the Amish have applied for 3 centuries. The legal dimension is real. Underground cisterns now require permits that permitting offices often lack the expertise to evaluate. Some states restrict it entirely. The key word in that concern is improperly. The communities running these since the 1700s have not poisoned their groundwater. Their cisterns have not failed in epidemic ways. The law restricts the poorly built version. It has not yet found a productive relationship with the well-built version. That is a regulatory problem worth solving. The rain does not fall on a schedule. It never has. It does not consult the calendar before deciding when to arrive and when to stay away. It does not consult the calendar before deciding when to arrive and when to stay away. You prepare for what will come by building the capacity to store what arrives. You do not wait for the need to become urgent before you build the system. You build it when conditions allow. You maintain it faithfully when conditions do not require you to use it. And when the dry weeks arrive, you draw from it slowly and with awareness. The Amish cistern is not a romantic object. It is not a symbol of resistance or a philosophical statement. It is a hole in the ground lined with lime covered with a wooden hatch. It has been quietly working on farms across 4 states every summer for 300 years. If you have a roof and a piece of ground, the place to begin is with a much simpler question. How much water fell on your roof the last time it rained seriously, and where did every gallon of it go? The answer is into the ground, into a storm drain, gone in an afternoon. The Amish noticed this a very long time ago. They built something to catch it, and the thing they built is still full.